Have you ever returned home to find a complete stranger lounging by your pool, drinking your expensive wine, and then had the audacity to tell you that you're the trespasser? That's exactly what happened to me last summer, kicking off the most bizarre property dispute I could have ever imagined. Before I dive into this wild story, I'd love to know if you've ever dealt with someone trying to claim something that was clearly yours. Drop a comment below sharing your experience. It was a sweltering Tuesday in July when I returned home a day early from my business trip to Chicago. The quarterly sales meeting had wrapped up ahead of schedule, and I was looking forward to surprising my wife with an unexpected evening together. Instead, I was the one who got the surprise. As I pulled into my driveway, everything seemed normal. At first, our two-story colonial looked just as I'd left it 3 days earlier, pristine landscaping, freshly painted shutters, and the American flag gently waving from the front porch post. My wife's car wasn't in the driveway, which made sense since she wouldn't be home from work for another few hours. I wheeled my suitcase through the front door, dropped my keys in the bowl by the entryway, and headed straight for the kitchen to grab a cold drink. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable splash of someone diving into our backyard pool. At first, I thought maybe my wife had taken the day off without mentioning it, but as I approached the sliding glass doors leading to our back patio, I froze. There, floating on one of our pool lounges with a glass of what appeared to be our special occasion wine, was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was maybe in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, designer, sunglasses perched on her nose, completely at ease as if she owned the place. Our Bluetooth speaker was blasting her music, and a spread of snacks sat on the table beside her, snacks from our pantry. I stood there for a moment, simply processing the bizarre scene before me. Then, collecting myself, I slid open the door and stepped onto the patio. "Excuse me," I called out, keeping my voice level despite my confusion. "Can I help you?" The woman jerked upright on the lounger, sloshing wine onto her designer swimsuit. For a brief moment she looked startled, but that expression quickly morphed into something entirely unexpected: indignation. "Who are you?" she demanded, setting her wine glass down with a sharp clink. "And what are you doing here?" I blinked, momentarily speechless. "I live here. This is my house, my pool. The real question is, who are you and why are you in my backyard?" The woman scoffed, reaching for a towel, my towel, and wrapping it around her waist as she stood. "That's impossible. I purchased this property last week. You must be confused about the address." "Purchased?" I shook my head, trying to make sense of her words. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake. I've owned this home for 5 years. My name is Alex Mercer. This is 1142 Oakwood Drive." "Exactly, 1142 Oakwood Drive." She nodded as if I'd just proven her point, "which I purchased from Prestige Properties 7 days ago." She gestured broadly at the pool and patio. "This is my pool now. You are the one trespassing." My patience began evaporating faster than the water droplets on the hot concrete. "That's ridiculous. This house was never for sale. I never listed it with any agency, let alone Prestige Properties, whatever that is." The woman, I would later come to know her as Karen Whitfield, reached for a leather tote bag beside the lounger and pulled out a folder. With practiced confidence, she extracted what appeared to be some kind of document with official-looking stamps. "This deed says otherwise," she stated, holding it just far enough away that I couldn't clearly read it. "Now I've been patient enough with this intrusion, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property before I call the police." My mind raced, trying to process this surreal confrontation. Was this an elaborate prank? A case of mistaken identity? Or something more sinister? "You know what?" I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "I think calling the police is an excellent idea, but I'll be the one making that call." Karen's expression flickered briefly, something between annoyance and calculation, before settling back into righteous indignation. "Go ahead. They'll confirm what I'm telling you." As I dialed 911, Karen gathered her things with deliberate slowness, acting for all the world like I was the unreasonable one. The absolute conviction in her manner was what disturbed me most. Either she was experiencing some kind of break from reality, or this was a scam of breathtaking boldness. Either way, as I waited for the police to arrive, watching this stranger make herself at home in my backyard, one thing became crystal clear. Getting this woman off my property was going to be much more complicated than I ever could have imagined. The 15 minutes waiting for the police were among the most surreal of my life. Karen remained by the pool, calmly reapplying sunscreen as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a criminal trespass. I stood by the patio door, unwilling to leave her unsupervised in my backyard. "You really should have researched before barging in here," she called out, her tone dripping with condescension. Prestige Properties handled everything quite efficiently. The previous owners, well, I suppose that would be you, decided on a quick private sale. "There was no sale," I replied firmly. "I never listed this house, never signed any paperwork, and certainly never handed over my property to anyone." Karen simply smiled, the kind of smile adults give to children who don't understand basic concepts. Sometimes banks handle these things when people fall behind. It happens more often than you'd think. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. 2 police officers, Officer Martinez and Officer Daniels, according to their name badges, stood on my front porch. Martinez was older, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen it all, while Daniels appeared younger and more cautious. "We received a call about a property dispute," Officer Martinez began. "Yes," I said, ushering them inside. "I came home to find this woman using my pool. She's claiming she somehow owns my house, which is absolutely false." As we walked through to the backyard, I quickly explained that I'd owned the house for 5 years, had never listed it for sale, and had no idea who this woman was. When we reached the patio, Karen had composed herself into the picture of affronted dignity. She'd wrapped herself in my beach towel and was sitting primly at the patio table, her folder of documents laid out before her. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said before I could speak again. "I'm Karen Whitfield, the new owner of this property. This man entered my home without permission and has been harassing me. Ma'am, can you provide some identification and proof of ownership?" Officer Daniels asked. Karen produced a driver's license and opened her folder. "Here's my deed, transfer of ownership documents, and the closing paperwork from Prestige Properties dated last Tuesday." The officers examined her documentation while I stared in disbelief. The papers certainly looked official at first glance. Letterhead, stamps, signatures. But this was impossible. "This is absurd," I interjected. "I have my driver's license showing this address, property tax statements, mortgage information, and utility bills in my name. I can show you all of it right now." Officer Martinez nodded. "We'd like to see that, sir." I hurried to my home office and returned with my documentation, years of mortgage statements, the original deed, property tax records, and recent utility bills, all clearly showing my name and address. "Additionally," I added, "my wife and I have dozens of neighbors who can verify we've lived here for years. None of these so-called transfer documents can possibly be legitimate." The officers compared both sets of paperwork side by side. "Miss Ace." "Whitfield," Officer Martinez said carefully, "Mr. Mercer's documentation appears comprehensive and dates back several years. Your paperwork is unusual. This doesn't look like standard property transfer documentation for our county." Karen's composure faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Prestige Properties handles private sales with their own paperwork. It's perfectly legal, just not the usual channel most people are familiar with." "I've never heard of this company," Officer Daniels remarked. "They're exclusive," Karen sniffed. "They specialize in connecting buyers with premium properties not publicly listed." By now, neighbors had begun to notice the police cars. The Johnsons from next door approached my fence. "Everything okay, Alex?" Jim called over. "Not really," I responded. "This woman is claiming she bought our house." Karen immediately turned to address him. "Mr. Johnson, so nice to see you again. I introduced myself last week as the new owner, remember?" Jim's brow furrowed in confusion. "Lady, I've never seen you before in my life, and the Mercers have lived here for years." Karen's face tightened, but she turned back to the officers. "He obviously doesn't remember. I've met several neighbors already." Officer Martinez had seen enough. "Ms. Whitfield, there's clearly a discrepancy here. Mr. Mercer has substantial documentation proving ownership, plus neighborhood verification. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and leave the premises until this can be sorted out properly. This is outrageous. Karen's voice rose sharply. I paid good money for this property. You can't just throw me out of my own home. Ma'am, we're not establishing permanent ownership right now. That's for the courts to decide if necessary. But given the documentation presented, Mr. Mercer has stronger claim to current possession. Karen stood, clutching her folder to her chest. I'll be contacting my attorney immediately and the police commissioner. This is completely unacceptable treatment. That's your right, Officer Martinez replied calmly. But for now, you need to leave or you'll be trespassing. Fine, Karen snapped, gathering her belongings. But mark my words, I'll be back with proper authorities who understand property law. She glanced at me coldly. Enjoy your borrowed time in my pool. As the officers escorted Karen to the front of the house, I noticed several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, watching the drama unfold. Karen held her head high, still wrapped in my beach towel, and marched to a luxury SUV parked down the street. Before getting in her car, she turned and addressed the small crowd that had gathered. I apologize for the disturbance in our beautiful neighborhood. Rest assured, once I straighten out this unfortunate confusion, I look forward to being a wonderful neighbor to all of you. With that, she drove away, leaving me standing with 2 police officers and a cluster of bewildered neighbors. Sir, Officer Martinez said, handing me his card, I strongly recommend you consult with an attorney immediately. I've seen property scams before, but never someone this bold. Document everything and consider filing for a restraining order if she returns. After the police left, I walked through my house in a daze, suddenly seeing it through new eyes as something that could be threatened, something I might need to defend. I checked every window, every door lock. In the kitchen, I noticed empty wine glasses in the sink that weren't there when I left. In the guest bathroom, unfamiliar toiletries were arranged neatly on the counter. That night, I barely slept, jolting, awake at every sound, wondering just how long Karen had been making herself at home in my house and what she might do next. The morning after Karen's poolside confrontation, I took a personal day from work. Sleep had been impossible, and I needed answers more than I needed to deliver my quarterly sales presentation. My first step was a thorough inspection of our home. In the light of day, evidence of Karen's intrusions became alarmingly clear. A damp towel stuffed behind the bathroom door, an unfamiliar coffee mug in the dishwasher, 3 bottles missing from our wine rack. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of violation through me. This wasn't just a one-time trespass. Karen had been making herself comfortable in our home for days. The most disturbing find came when I checked our home security system. We had cameras covering the front door, backyard and driveway, which I'd installed more for package theft prevention than anything else. Scrolling back through the footage, I felt my stomach tighten. Karen had first appeared last Wednesday, just one day after I'd left for Chicago. The footage showed her confidently walking up to our front door, key in hand, letting herself in. It's as if she owned the place. Over the next 5 days, she came and went freely, sometimes bringing shopping bags, once hosting 2 friends for a pool day. What the hell? I muttered, downloading copies of every incriminating clip. My next call was to our locksmith, who arrived within the hour to change every lock in the house. As he worked, I placed an online order for additional security cameras to cover our blind. Spots. Mind if I ask why the emergency service call? The locksmith asked as he replaced our front door deadbolt. Someone's been entering my house with a key I never provided, I explained. He paused, screwdriver in hand. That's the 3rd call like this I've had this month. Lady over on Cypress Street had the same thing. Stranger with keys to her house. Said the woman claimed to be the new owner. My blood ran cold. Did this woman happen to be blonde, mid-40s? Can't say. Just heard about it from the customer. He returned to his work. People are getting more brazen these days. With new locks installed, I drove directly to the county records office. The clerk, a meticulous older woman named Doris, pulled up our property records immediately. Let's see, Mercer Residence, 1142 Oakwood Drive, she murmured, scanning her computer screen. Purchased 5 years ago, current on all property taxes, no liens, no recent filings or transfers. She looked up at me. Your property is exactly as it should be, Mr. Mercer, firmly in your name. Could someone file false transfer documents? I asked. Doris frowned. Not legally. All property transfers require notarized signatures from the legal owners, verification of identity, proper recording with our office, and transfer tax payment. She peered at me over her reading glasses. Has someone claimed otherwise? I explained the situation with Karen, watching Doris's expression shift from confusion to concern. That sounds like deed fraud, she said, lowering her voice. It's been happening more frequently. Someone creates convincing but fraudulent documents, then uses them to scam renters, take out loans against properties, or even attempt to sell homes they don't own. She printed copies of my official records, stamped them with the county seal, and then added a note to my property file, flagging it for additional verification requirements should anyone attempt to file changes. My next stop was a quick circuit of our immediate neighbors. The revelations were disturbing. Karen had introduced herself to at least 5 different neighbors over the past week, consistently claiming to be the new owner. To the Wilsons, she'd mentioned plans for a major renovation. To elderly Mrs. Abernathy, she'd offered to help with yard maintenance as a neighborly gesture. She'd even told the Collins family that she'd bought our house specifically for the prestigious school district. When I returned home, there was a business card tucked into our front door, Samuel Greenfield, real estate attorney. I called immediately and secured an appointment for the following morning. The final disturbing discovery came that evening. My wife Melissa was checking our mail when she found an envelope addressed to the current residents. Inside was a professionally printed card. Hello neighbors, I'm Karen Whitfield, and I'm thrilled to be joining your beautiful community as the new owner of 1142 Oakwood Drive. I'll be hosting a small housewarming gathering this Saturday at 3 p.m. Stop by for refreshments by the pool and get to know your new neighbor. RSVP appreciated but not required. As if the invasion of our property wasn't enough, Karen was now planning a party at our home in 2 days. I was taping the invitation to my growing evidence board when my phone chimed with a social media notification. A mutual friend had tagged me in a comment. Alex, isn't this your backyard? I clicked through to find Karen's public Instagram profile. There, displayed for all to see, were dozens of photos of her lounging by our pool, cooking in our kitchen, and enjoying sunset drinks on our patio. The caption under a particularly stunning shot of our professionally landscaped backyard read, "So blessed to have finally found my forever home. New homeowner, dream come true, luxury living." This wasn't confusion or misunderstanding. This was calculated. Karen wasn't delusional. She was running some kind of scam, and our home was her target. Tomorrow. Couldn't come fast enough. I needed legal protection, and I needed to understand exactly what Karen was planning before she escalated further. I spent Wednesday morning with Samuel Greenfield, the real estate attorney. His office, wood-paneled and reassuringly formal, provided the first sense of stability I'd felt since discovering Karen in my pool. "This is textbook deed fraud," Greenfield confirmed after reviewing my evidence. Though her approach is unusually brazen, most perpetrators try to extract money without confronting the actual homeowners. "What's her endgame?" I asked. "She can't actually believe she'll get my house. There are several possibilities. She might be setting up to scam potential renters by showing your home and collecting deposits. Or she could be establishing a paper trail to take out loans against your property. Either way, we need immediate protective measures." By noon, Greenfield had drafted cease and desist letters to both Karen and Prestige Properties and filed for an emergency temporary restraining order. I left his office feeling marginally better, at least until I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Jim Johnson, my next-door neighbor. "Alex, there's someone at your house right now," Jim said when I called back. "A woman and a man in a locksmith. And they're at your front door." My heart raced. "I'm 15 minutes away. Can you see what they're doing?" "They're changing your locks, man. The woman's supervising, same blonde from yesterday. Should I call the police?" "Yes, immediately. Tell them this is the same trespasser from yesterday. I'm on my way." I broke several speed limits getting home. As I screeched into my driveway, I saw Karen standing on my front porch with a middle-aged man in uniform. A van with Secure Solutions locksmith painted on the side sat in the street. Karen's expression darkened when she saw me, but she quickly recovered, turning to the locksmith with an exasperated sigh loud enough for me to hear as I approached. "This is exactly what I was telling you about," she said. "The former resident who refuses to accept the sale." The locksmith looked uncomfortable, tools in hand, clearly caught in the middle of something he hadn't signed up for. "This is my house," I stated firmly, addressing the locksmith directly. "This woman is trespassing and has been served with a restraining order." A slight exaggeration. The order wasn't yet approved, but he didn't need to know that. "Alex, look at this," Melissa said, turning her screen toward me. It showed a local news article from 8 months ago. "Homeowners warn of sophisticated property scam." The story detailed several cases where a woman had falsely claimed ownership, of homes even moving into one while the owners were on vacation. "The description matches Karen," I noted, quickly skimming the article. "They never caught her." The article says charges were filed, but the suspect disappeared before arrest. This discovery led us down a rabbit hole of similar news stories across 3 neighboring counties. We found 6 separate incidents with strikingly similar patterns. A well-dressed professional woman claiming to have purchased properties through private sales, presenting convincing but fraudulent documents, and in several cases, actually moving into homes or showing them to potential renters. "She's done this before," I said, printing the articles for our evidence wall. "Multiple times. Our research took an unsettling turn when we found an online forum for fraud victims. A post from username PropertyVictim427 caught our attention. Beware of Karen Whitfield and Prestige Properties scam in the Tri-County area." The detailed post described a nearly identical situation to ours. Karen claimed ownership of their vacation home, changed locks, and even collected rental deposits from unsuspecting victims before disappearing when authorities got involved. "There are 13 responses here from other victims," Melissa noted, her voice tight. "Same woman, similar scam, different property types. By mid-afternoon we had assembled a disturbing profile. Karen Whitfield, possibly an alias, had a pattern of targeting homes where owners might be temporarily absent. Vacation properties, homes during renovations, or in our case, during a business trip. She would create fraudulent ownership documents, establish herself publicly as the new owner, and then leverage this false claim in various ways. Some victims reported she had collected rental deposits from multiple tenants for the same property. Others discovered she had used fraudulent ownership to obtain lines of credit. In one particularly bold case, she had actually listed someone's vacation home for sale and conducted showings before being discovered. I called Detective Rodriguez at the Financial Crimes Division, whom Greenfield had recommended. After explaining the situation and our findings, she agreed to meet us the following morning. "This is more extensive than I initially realized," she said. "Bring everything you've gathered." Just as we were compiling our research, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a formal notice from Willowbrook Property Management, a company we'd never heard of, demanding immediate payment of $2,800 for July rent on our property, claiming Karen Whitfield as the new owner. "They're trying to establish a landlord-tenant relationship on paper," Melissa realized. "If we paid this, it could be used as evidence that we acknowledge her ownership claim," I finished. Another angle in her scam. I added the fraudulent rent demand to our evidence collection and called Greenfield again. He confirmed our theory and advised documenting but ignoring the demand. "Your restraining order has been granted," he added. "The sheriff will serve her tomorrow. I've also filed emergency notifications with all 3 credit bureaus to freeze any attempts to take out loans against your property." Our final discovery that day came from an unexpected source. Our neighborhood had a private social media group where residents shared local information. I posted a carefully worded message asking if anyone had encountered Karen recently. The responses flooded in immediately. "She told me she bought your house for cash and was planning a massive renovation. She asked if I could recommend a pool service since she just bought the house with the gorgeous backyard pool on Oakwood. She invited my daughter to apply as her personal assistant once she settles into her new home." Most disturbingly, one neighbor wrote, "She was in your backyard 2 weeks ago measuring the pool area. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was the new owner and planning to expand the patio. I thought it was strange I hadn't heard you were selling." 2 weeks ago, when we were both home. Karen had been planning this takeover long before I left for Chicago. As evening fell, we secured every entry point and activated our expanded security system. The cameras now covered every approach to our home, with alerts set to our phones for any motion detection. We were exhausted, but better prepared, finally understanding the scope of what we were facing. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a random trespasser or confused woman. She was a sophisticated scammer with a documented history of property fraud across multiple jurisdictions. "He's delusional," Karen countered smoothly. "I have the paperwork right here showing I purchased this property last week." She held up her now familiar folder of fraudulent documents. The locksmith backed away from my door. "Look, I don't want any trouble. This seems like something you folks need to sort out legally before I get involved." Karen's composed facade cracked slightly. "I paid you to do a job. I need these locks changed immediately. He's the trespasser here." As they argued, a police cruiser pulled up. To my relief, it was Officer Martinez from yesterday. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, approaching with a weary expression, "we discussed this situation yesterday. You were advised not to return to this property." Karen straightened, clutching her folder like a shield. "Officer, I've been more than patient. I purchased this home legally, and this man refuses to vacate. I'm simply securing my property. These..." Locksmith took the opportunity to retreat to his van, clearly wanting no part in this dispute. Officer Martinez turned to me. "Mr. Mercer, have you taken any legal steps since yesterday?" "Yes, I met with an attorney this morning. He's filed for a restraining order and sent cease and desist notices. The county records office has confirmed I am the legal owner and has flagged my property records against fraudulent filings." Karen scoffed. "This is absurd. Jackson, explain the situation." The man who had been standing silently beside Karen stepped forward. Dressed in a blazer with an official-looking name badge reading Property Manager, he projected an air of authority. "Officer, I'm Jackson Reed, representing Prestige Properties. We handled the private sale of this residence last week. Mr. Mercer is now classified as a holdover tenant who has been served with proper eviction notices." He produced a document with official-looking stamps and signatures, an eviction notice with yesterday's date. Officer Martinez examined it briefly. "This isn't a valid eviction notice for our county. Additionally, there's no record of property transfer with the county assessor." "We file our own paperwork," Jackson stated dismissively. "Our legal team handles everything internally." "That's not how property law works in this state," Martinez replied. "Without county recording, there is no legal transfer." Karen's composure was crumbling. "This is outrageous. I paid good money for this house." "Ma'am, I need you and your associate to leave this property immediately," Martinez said firmly. "This is now the second warning for criminal trespass. There won't be a third." Karen looked from Martinez to me, calculation visible behind her anger. "Fine, but this isn't over. My attorneys will be in touch." She turned to Jackson. "Document everything." As they retreated to a black SUV parked across the street, I noticed Karen taking photos of my house with her phone. "I recommend installing security cameras if you haven't already," Officer Martinez advised, "and get that restraining order finalized as quickly as possible." After he left, I called Greenfield to update him on the confrontation. His response was immediate. "This changes things. We're dealing with an organized operation, not just an individual. I'm heading to the courthouse personally to expedite the restraining order." That night, I installed motion-activated floodlights and 3 additional security cameras. As I finished mounting the last one, a notification buzzed on my phone, an update from Karen's Instagram account. A new post showed the front of my house with the caption, "Dealing with difficult tenant situations in my beautiful new home." Sometimes investment properties come with unexpected challenges. Danja landlord life, danja property management. The comments section was filled with sympathetic responses from her followers, completely unaware that they were witnessing a criminal scheme in mind-simming progress. With Karen temporarily deterred by Officer Martinez's intervention, I finally had time to conduct a deeper investigation. Melissa took the day off to help, setting up at our dining room table with laptops, notepads, and a steadily growing evidence wall that was beginning to resemble something from a crime thriller. "Let's start with this Prestige Properties," Melissa suggested, fingers flying across her keyboard. "No website, no business license registered in the state, and the address on Karen's paperwork belongs to a UPS store that rents mailboxes. What about Jackson Reed, her so-called property manager?" I asked. Melissa shook her head. "No real estate license under that name in our state. No LinkedIn profile either. I was searching Karen's social media accounts, scrolling through months of posts. Her Instagram portrayed the life of a successful real estate investor with photos of upscale properties, motivational quotes about building wealth through real estate, and frequent mentions of her exclusive client list." "Why us?" Melissa wondered as we finally headed to bed. Out of all the houses she could have targeted, the answer came at 2:17 a.m. when our security system chimed with an alert. On the camera feed, we watched Karen slowly driving past our house, headlights off, coming to a stop directly across the street. She sat there for nearly 5 minutes just watching our home before driving away. This wasn't just about scamming money. For Karen, this seemed personal, a game she was determined to win regardless of the consequences. Restraining orders, property monitoring services, credit freezes. "We're building a legal fortress around your home." Samuel Greenfield's voice carried confidence as he outlined our strategy across his polished conference table. Detective Rodriguez sat beside him, her case folder already substantial despite being just 2 days into the investigation. "We've confirmed Ms. Whitfield has a history of similar schemes," Rodriguez explained, sliding photographs across the table. 3 prior arrests, though she's managed to avoid conviction through technicalities and jurisdictional issues. She operates under at least 4 aliases that we've identified. The photos showed Karen, or whatever her real name was, with different hair colors and styles, but always with that same self-assured expression. In each case, she had targeted properties with values exceeding $500,000, focusing on homes with distinctive features that could be showcased on social media. "She's not just after quick money," Rodriguez continued. "She's building a brand as a successful real estate investor, using your home and others as props. The financial scams, collecting rent, deposits, even loan applications, are just one part of her operation." Greenfield tapped his pen against a legal pad covered in notes. "We've completed the emergency filing with the county recorder's office. No property transfers can be processed without enhanced verification, including your in-person signature and multiple forms of identification." "What about the locksmith incident?" Melissa asked. "Can we press charges?" "Absolutely," Rodriguez nodded. "That's attempted breaking and entering, plus violation of the initial police warning. Combined with the documented pattern of behavior, we now have grounds for criminal trespassing charges." Greenfield outlined our comprehensive legal strategy. First, the emergency restraining order already in place prohibited Karen from coming within 500 feet of our home or contacting us in any way. The sheriff's department had attempted service that morning, though they reported she wasn't at her listed address. Second, we filed formal complaints with the district attorney's office for criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and fraud. These would take time to process, but established an official record of her actions. Third, we submitted notarized property declarations with the county recorder, the tax assessor, and the property records division, creating multiple layers of protection against fraudulent transfers. Finally, we initiated a civil lawsuit seeking damages for emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and defamation based on her false social media claims. "What should we expect next?" I asked. "She doesn't seem like the type to be deterred by legal paperwork." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Based on her pattern, she'll likely attempt to establish her claim through social proof, convincing others she's the legitimate owner to create confusion and apparent validity. We should warn your neighbors to report any unusual activity." That afternoon, we distributed a carefully worded notice to every home in our neighborhood, explaining the situation without unnecessary drama. We included contact information for Detective Rodriguez and requested immediate notification of any sightings of Karen or activities related to our property. At Greenfield's recommendation, We also met with the Homeowners Association Board, providing documentation of the fraud attempt and requesting additional security patrols. The HOA president, initially skeptical, became notably concerned when we showed him Karen's Instagram posts featuring our community amenities, where she claimed to be a new resident. She's been using the community pool, he confirmed, checking their access logs. Signed in as Karen Whitfield, property owner at 1142 Oakwood. We never verified because, well, people don't usually lie about these things. Our home security upgrades continued with professional-grade cameras, motion sensors on all windows, and a cellular backup system that couldn't be disabled by cutting phone or internet lines. The security company added our property to their priority response list, promising police notification within 30 seconds of any alarm activation. As evening approached, Detective Rodriguez called with unsettling news. We've located Ms. Whitfield's vehicle outside an apartment complex in Riverside. When officers approached to serve the restraining order, neighbors informed them she'd been bragging about her new home with a pool and had invited several people to a housewarming party this weekend. The party she planned at our house, I realized exactly. She's collected at least 3 $1,200 deposits from potential renters for your property, showing them photos from her social media. We're taking statements now. After ending the call, I found Melissa staring at her laptop in disbelief. Alex, look at this. She's created an actual rental listing. There on the screen was our home, professionally photographed from angles that must have been taken during her unauthorized visits, listed as a luxury property available for immediate rental on multiple housing websites. The description boasted about the newly renovated pool area and exclusive neighborhood, listing a monthly rent of $3,800 with Karen's contact information for showings. She's collecting deposits for a property she doesn't own, Melissa whispered. How many people has she scammed using our home? The situation had escalated from a personal violation to something much larger. Innocent third parties were now being victimized because of Karen's elaborate fraud. That night, as we activated our security system before bed, an alert sounded from the front yard camera. On the screen, we watched a car slowly drive past, passengers clearly examining our house. Not Karen this time, but potential victims of her rental scam, perhaps coming to view the property they thought might become their home. We were no longer just protecting our property. We were trying to prevent others from becoming collateral damage in Karen's sophisticated scheme. Saturday dawned with an eerie calm. According to Karen's housewarming invitations, the party at our pool was scheduled for 3 p.m. Detective Rodriguez had arranged for an unmarked police car to monitor our street, while our neighbors had been instructed to report any unusual activity. "Do you think she'll actually show up?" Melissa asked as we finished breakfast, her coffee growing cold beside her barely touched toast. "Part of me hopes she does," I admitted. "If she trespasses after being served the restraining order, they can arrest her on the spot." We'd barely finished speaking when our phones simultaneously chimed with security alerts. On the screen, a white catering van had pulled into our driveway. 2 men in white uniforms were unloading trays at our front door. I hurried outside, Melissa calling Detective Rodriguez behind me. "Can I help you?" I asked, blocking their path to our door. "Afternoon, sir. We're from Elite Catering. We have a delivery for Ms. Whitfield's housewarming event." I took a deep breath. There must be some mistake. This is my home, and there's no event scheduled here today. The delivery man checked his paperwork. 1142 Oakwood Drive. Pool party 3 p.m. We've been paid in full already. Paid by whom? Ms. Karen Whitfield. She booked us last week. I explained the situation as succinctly as possible, showing them my identification with the matching address. Their confusion turned to concern when I mentioned police involvement. "This is the third weird situation we've had this month," the driver confided. Same woman ordered catering for an office warming at a downtown address that turned out to be an empty storefront. As they departed, promising to document the incident for the police, a text arrived from Jim next door. "Florist just tried to deliver to your house. Sent them away." Karen was moving forward with her fictional party despite the restraining order, creating the appearance of legitimate ownership through these service providers. By noon, we'd turned away 2 more deliveries. a bartending service, and a rental company with patio furniture. Each vendor had been paid in advance with a credit card, each had legitimate-looking order forms, and each left confused and concerned about being entangled in a fraud. Detective Rodriguez arrived at 2 p.m. accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. "We have reason to believe she'll attempt to access the property today," she explained. "The district attorney has approved immediate arrest if she violates the restraining order." As 3 o'clock approached, cars began slowing as they passed. Our house, invited guests arriving for a party that wasn't happening. Some drove away confused while others parked and approached our door, only to be intercepted by Officer Martinez explaining the situation. At precisely 3:15, a white luxury SUV turned onto our street, stopping about 6 houses down. Even from a distance, Karen's blonde hair was unmistakable. She remained in her vehicle, observing the scene. The police presence, the confused guests, the absence of her planned party. "She's staying outside the 500-foot restriction," Rodriguez noted. Smart, but still problematic given her intent. For 30 minutes, Karen remained in her SUV, occasionally speaking on her phone, but never approaching. Finally, she drove away, but our relief was short-lived. At 4:45, she returned, this time with reinforcements. 3 cars pulled up near the edge of the restraining order boundary. Karen emerged from the first, while 2 men and another woman exited the others. They gathered on the sidewalk just beyond the legal limit, discussing something with animated gestures toward our home. Rodriguez immediately approached them, her badge visible. From our front porch we couldn't hear the conversation, but Karen's body language was defiant. After several minutes, her group reluctantly returned to their vehicles and departed. "She's brought her property manager and 2 people she introduced as potential renters," Rodriguez explained upon returning. "Claims she was conducting a street viewing of the property she owns but can't access due to tenant harassment. She's still maintaining the act, even to the police?" Melissa asked incredulously. "It's not an act to her anymore," Rodriguez replied. "She's fully committed to this alternative reality. That makes her particularly dangerous." The party disruption proved only a minor setback in Karen's campaign. By Sunday morning, for rent signs had appeared along our street, directing interested parties to a website featuring interior photos of our home and contact information for Willowbrook Property Management. More disturbing was what greeted us Monday morning. Our utilities had been disconnected. Someone called claiming to be the new property owner, the power company representative explained when I called. They requested service termination due to renovation plans. Since they had your account number and the verification address, the request was processed. The water and gas companies reported similar calls. Each service required hours of documentation and verification to restore, with each company apologizing for the confusion but implementing new security protocols on our accounts. The final escalation came that evening when we returned from the utility company offices. Our front door stood partially open. Inside, evidence of intrusion was immediate. Couch cushions displaced, kitchen cabinets open, and a lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume. We retreated immediately, calling the police from our car. The responding officers cleared the house, confirming no one remained inside, but the violation was profound. Our security camera had captured everything. Karen and her property manager entering through the back door using what appeared to be a key. The footage showed them methodically going through our home, taking photos of each room, opening closets, examining personal documents. Most disturbingly, Karen had changed into a bathing suit and spent 20 minutes lounging by our pool, drinking our wine, and posing for photos her companion took, photos that would undoubtedly appear on her social media as evidence of her ownership. Detective Rodriguez arrived personally to process the scene. "This crosses the line from fraud to breaking and entering," she confirmed. "The restraining order violation alone justifies immediate arrest. We'll put out an APB tonight." As crime scene technicians dusted for fingerprints, I discovered the most alarming detail yet. Several prospective tenant applications on our kitchen counter, complete with copies of driver's licenses, social security numbers, and credit reports. Karen wasn't just scamming us. She was collecting sensitive personal information from innocent rental applicants. Identity theft, Rodriguez confirmed grimly. The property scam is just the beginning. She's harvesting financial information from multiple victims. That night, as we checked into a hotel at Rodriguez's recommendation, we watched Karen's Instagram update with new photos of her relaxing in our pool, cooking in our kitchen, and enjoying the first quiet evening in my beautiful new home. The caption beneath read, "Finally took possession of my investment property today after resolving tenant issues. So blessed to begin this new chapter." New beginnings. His dream home. Successful investor. The brazen lie had received over 100 congratulatory comments, unwitting social validation for a criminal escalation that had turned our lives upside down. We spent 3 nights in the hotel while security experts completely overhauled our home's protection systems. New doors with reinforced frames, commercial-grade deadbolts, window sensors, motion detectors, the works. The security company's technician called it courthouse-level protection, which was fitting since our home had essentially become the center of a criminal case. "You can return home today," Detective Rodriguez confirmed during our morning call. "We've maintained surveillance and there's been no further activity." "Any progress finding her?" Melissa asked. We'd been asking the same question daily. "Not yet. She's vacated her apartment. Her known vehicles haven't been spotted. We've flagged her identity." "Below, they're in the kitchen," I whispered, watching the monitors. "Living room, guest room." The footsteps grew closer. Someone tried our bedroom door, found it blocked, and began pushing against it. The dresser scraped against the floor as it moved inch by inch, then suddenly flashing lights through the windows. Police sirens. Shouts of, "Police, come out with your hands up!" The pressure against our door instantly ceased. On the security monitor, we watched the intruders scatter, running toward various exits only to find officers waiting. Karen herself made it halfway across the backyard before being tackled beside the pool she had so proudly claimed as her own. Within minutes, all 4 intruders were handcuffed and seated on our front lawn. Officers methodically searched the moving truck, discovering an inventory list of our possessions with estimated values and several blank bill of sale forms. "They were going to clean us out," Detective Rodriguez explained as we gave our statements. "Steal everything valuable, then use forged documentation to prove you'd sold them the items before moving out." Karen sat in the back of a police cruiser, her composed facade finally shattered. Gone was the confident smile and poised demeanor, replaced by smudged makeup and open fury. When she spotted us speaking with Rodriguez, she began shouting through the window, her words muffled but her rage unmistakable. "We've got her dead to rights," Rodriguez assured us. "Breaking and entering, violation of restraining order, attempted burglary, conspiracy, fraud, plus all the previous charges. Even with a good attorney, she's facing years, not months." As dawn broke, crime scene technicians continued documenting everything while officers took detailed statements from us and our neighbors. The moving truck contained more than just tools for burglary. It held documentation of Karen's broader operation, including files on other properties she had targeted. "This wasn't just about your house," Rodriguez explained, showing us a folder from the evidence collection. "You were one of 7 current targets. She had files on properties across 3 counties, all with detailed intrusion plans. When the police finally departed, taking Karen and her accomplices to booking, Melissa and I stood in our kitchen surveying the aftermath. Fingerprint dust covered surfaces. Evidence markers dotted the floor. The sense of violation had reached its peak. "I can't stay here," Melissa said quietly. "Not tonight, maybe not ever." I nodded, understanding completely. Our home, the place we had loved, had saved for, had made our own, now felt irreparably tainted. Karen might be in custody, but her presence lingered in every room, every corner, every shadow. "We'll get a hotel for now," I agreed. "Figure out next steps tomorrow." As we packed overnight bags, my phone rang. Samuel Greenfield calling with news from the district attorney's office. "They're charging her with 26 separate felony counts," he reported. "Her accomplices are already turning on her, offering testimony for reduced sentences. One claims she's done this to over 30 properties in the past 2 years." The scale of Karen's operation was only now becoming clear. A systematic campaign of property fraud, identity theft, and burglary masquerading as real estate investment. We had reached the breaking point, not just in Karen's criminal escalation, but in our relationship with our home. As we locked the door behind us, neither of us knew if we would ever feel safe there again, or if Karen's invasion had permanently destroyed the sense of security that makes a house a home. The county courthouse loomed imposingly against the morning sky, its stone facade a testament to the permanence of law compared to the chaos Karen had inflicted on our lives. Today marked the first preliminary hearing in what prosecutors warned would be a lengthy legal process. "Remember, this is just procedural," Greenfield cautioned as we climbed the courthouse steps. "Don't expect dramatic revelations or immediate resolution." The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Karen's entrance caused an involuntary tightening in my chest, her first appearance since the night of the break-in. The orange jumpsuit and handcuffs should have diminished her, yet somehow she maintained that same self-assured posture, scanning the room like she was evaluating an investment property. When her eyes met mine, there wasn't a flicker of remorse, only calculation. She leaned toward her public defender, whispering something that made him glance our way with a furrowed brow. "All rise," the bailiff called, as Judge Harriet Wheeler entered, a stern-faced woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency. Case numbers, charges read, preliminary motions addressed. Karen's attorney immediately requested bail, arguing she had substantial community ties and posed no flight risk. The prosecutor, Andrea Winters, responded with methodical precision, unfolding Karen's history before the court. "Your Honor, the defendant has operated under at least 7 aliases, has no verifiable permanent address, and was apprehended while actively committing a home invasion. Furthermore, she faces similar charges in 3 other counties." Judge Wheeler peered at Karen over her glasses. "Bail denied. Defendant shall remain in custody." Karen's composed expression cracked momentarily, a flash of genuine anger breaking through the calculated facade. "They'll try to plead this down," Greenfield whispered as the judge scheduled further hearings. "With this many charges across multiple jurisdictions, the DA might consolidate for efficiency." The hearing concluded in under 30 minutes, feeling anticlimactic after weeks of escalating drama. Karen was led away, turning once to stare directly at us, a look that sent an uncomfortable chill down my spine despite the crowded courtroom. Outside, Detective Rodriguez waited with updates. "We've been piecing together her operation from seized documents. It's more sophisticated than we initially thought." She opened a folder containing photographs of evidence. "Karen, whose real name appears to be Linda Farrow, has been running variations of this scam for at least 7 years across multiple states." The evidence painted a picture of a methodical criminal enterprise dressed in the language of aspirational real estate investment. Karen maintained elaborate social media profiles showcasing her properties to build credibility, created fraudulent documents through online services, and leveraged the confusion to extract money from multiple sources, rental deposits, loans, against properties she didn't own, and eventually outright theft of valuables. "What about her accomplices?" Melissa asked. 3 have agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. They've identified 15 additional properties Karen targeted, plus at least 12 victims who paid rental deposits for your home. The human cost continued to expand. Each folder, each case number, represented someone whose security had been violated, whose trust had been exploited, whose life had been disrupted by Karen's elaborate fraud. 2 weeks later, we returned for Karen's arraignment. The charges had indeed been consolidated, 43 felony counts across multiple jurisdictions, including breaking and entering, fraud, identity theft, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. Karen pleaded not guilty to all charges, her attorney requesting a psychological evaluation to determine her fitness for trial. The judge granted the request, though the prosecutor's eye roll suggested this was viewed as a delay tactic rather than legitimate concern. "Is there a chance she actually believes her own lies?" I asked Rodriguez afterward. "That she somehow thinks she really owns our home?" "The psychological evaluation will address that, but I'm skeptical," she replied. Her methods were too organized, too systematic. She kept meticulous records of her victims, tracked payment amounts, maintained separate phones for different aliases. That suggests awareness of wrongdoing, not delusion. The evaluation confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. Karen was deemed fully competent, with the psychologist noting a pronounced narcissistic personality disorder, but complete awareness of legal and social boundaries with deliberate choices to violate them. Through spring and into summer, we navigated the grinding machinery of the justice system. Each hearing revealed new aspects of Karen's operation. Each piece of evidence reinforced the calculated nature of her crimes. The prosecutor built a case not just around our experience, but around a pattern of behavior, targeting dozens of victims. During one particularly revealing hearing, financial records demonstrated how Karen had parlayed her fictional real estate success into actual income, charging aspiring investors for mentorship programs and exclusive property acquisition strategies. Our home had been both target and marketing material, showcased to convince others of her expertise while she extracted money from everyone involved, never approaching. Finally, she drove away, but our relief was short-lived. At 4:45 she returned, this time with reinforcements. 3 cars pulled up near the edge of the restraining order boundary. Karen emerged from the first, while 2 men and another woman exited the others. They gathered on the sidewalk just beyond the legal limit, discussing something with animated gestures toward our home. Rodriguez immediately approached them, her badge visible. From our front porch we couldn't hear the conversation, but Karen's body language was defiant. After several minutes her group reluctantly returned to their vehicles and departed. She's brought her property manager and 2 people she introduced as potential renters, Rodriguez explained upon returning. Claims she was conducting a street viewing of the property she owns, but can't access due to tenant harassment. She's still maintaining the act even to the police? Melissa asked incredulously. It's not an act to her anymore, Rodriguez replied. She's fully committed to this alternative with TSA and Border Patrol, but she has multiple aliases. The detective hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. We've identified 8 victims who paid rental deposits for your home totaling over $15,000. 2 families actually sold furniture and gave notice on their current apartments, believing they'd be moving into your house next week. The human cost of Karen's scam was expanding beyond us, creating ripples of devastation through other innocent lives. It made our own violation feel both more significant and somehow smaller in the larger pattern of harm. Returning home felt strange, like visiting a place you once knew intimately, but that had somehow transformed. Our furniture stood where it always had, yet everything felt different, contaminated, violated. We should get back to normal, I suggested, trying to sound convincing. Maybe use the pool, reclaim our space. Melissa nodded, but her eyes kept darting to windows and doors, checking and rechecking locks. The security company had installed a monitoring station in our kitchen, with screens showing all camera feeds simultaneously. We found ourselves constantly glancing at it, jumping at every notification. We ordered takeout for dinner, neither of just comfortable enough to cook in the kitchen, where Karen had so recently made herself at home. As we picked at our food, our phones chimed with an Instagram notification. Karen had posted again, not photos of our home this time, but a long text post. Being a real estate investor means facing challenges. Unfortunately, the previous residents of my new property have engaged in harassment and false police reports, forcing me to temporarily delay moving into my dream home. I'm taking legal action against these individuals and look forward to resolution soon. Thank you to my followers for your support during this difficult time. Real Estate Wars, standing my ground. She's unbelievable, Melissa whispered. How can she keep this up when there's a warrant for her arrest? The answer came in the comments section, where Karen was actively responding to supporters. Thank you all for the encouragement. Just secured a temporary apartment until my attorneys resolve this situation, staying positive. This wasn't just delusion, it was calculated image management. Karen was controlling the narrative, even while fugitive from justice, painting herself As the victim, while continuing to bolster her fictional success story, we should try to sleep, I suggested, though neither of us expected much rest. The security system woke us at 2:37 a.m. Multiple alerts, multiple cameras triggered simultaneously. I fumbled for my phone, heart pounding as I pulled up the security feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Not just Karen this time, a small moving truck idling at the curb, its rear doors open. 4 people systematically approaching our home, communicating via handheld radios. Karen, dressed in black, directed operations from the sidewalk while the others tested windows and doors. "They're trying to break in," I whispered to Melissa, already dialing 911. "Multiple intruders." "Police are on their way," I told her after completing the call. 4-minute estimated response time. Those 4 minutes stretched eternally as we watch the intruders methodically work their way around our home, testing every potential entry point. The new security measures were holding, but their persistence was terrifying. Finally, one man produced what appeared to be a glass-cutting tool, approaching our sliding door to the pool. "They're going to get in," Melissa gasped. The security system blared as the glass breach sensor activated. On the monitor, we watched as the man created a hole large enough to reach through and unlock the door. All 4 intruders quickly entered. Our home. We barricaded ourselves in the master bedroom, pushing a dresser against the door as footsteps echoed through the house. Through it all, Karen maintained her composure, occasionally passing notes to her attorney but otherwise sitting impassively as her criminal enterprise was dissected. Only once did she show real emotion, when the prosecutor displayed her Instagram post side by side with evidence photos, contrasting her carefully curated image with documented criminal activity. "Your Honor," Karen suddenly interrupted, standing despite her attorney's attempt to restrain her. "This is character assassination. I purchased these properties legally through non-traditional channels. These people are conspiring against legitimate business practices they don't understand." Judge Wheeler's response was icy. "Sit down, Ms. Farrow. You'll have your opportunity to present a defense when appropriate." Another outburst will result in contempt charges. By August, with trial still months away, the weight of evidence led to plea negotiations. Greenfield called with the offer. Karen would plead guilty to 11 felony counts with recommended sentencing of 7 to 10 years plus restitution to all identified victims. "The DA believes this serves justice while sparing dozens of victims from testifying," he explained. "They've prioritized the most serious charges with the strongest evidence." We agreed to the arrangement, relieved to avoid a lengthy trial, but unsettled by the thought that any sentence seemed inadequate for the havoc Karen had wreaked across so many lives. The plea hearing provided the closest thing to closure the justice system could offer. Karen stood before Judge Wheeler, responding guilty in a flat tone to each charge as it was read. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded Karen to continued custody. As officers led her from the courtroom, Karen locked eyes with me one final time. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement, only the same calculating assessment, as if mentally adding us to some ledger of inconveniences in her disrupted plans. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by other victims who had attended the hearing, I realized the justice system had performed its function efficiently, if impersonally. Karen would serve time, restitution would be ordered, records would be corrected. Yet standing there in the August heat, watching families who had lost savings, couples whose personal information had been compromised, elderly victims whose sense of security had been shattered, I understood that judicial justice was just one dimension of recovery. The system could imprison Karen, but it couldn't restore the intangible sense of safety she had stolen. That we would each have to rebuild ourselves one day at a time. 3 months after Karen's sentencing, 8 years with possibility of parole after 5, a sense of normalcy had gradually returned to our lives. The media frenzy around the Instagram property scammer had finally subsided, leaving us to rebuild the peace Karen had so thoroughly disrupted. The financial aspects had resolved with surprising efficiency. Karen's assets were seized and liquidated for victim restitution. Our insurance covered the property damage and security upgrades. The county even waived our property reassessment fees, after correcting the fraudulent filings Karen had somehow slipped into the system. The emotional resolution proved more challenging. For weeks after the break-in, we'd stayed with Melissa's parents, unable to face returning home. The psychological weight of the violation lingered far longer than any physical evidence. "It's not the house's fault," our therapist had gently suggested during a joint session. "Karen invaded your space, but only you can decide if she gets to take it from you permanently." That perspective shifted something fundamental in our thinking. We'd been allowing Karen to maintain control by surrendering our home to the shadow of her presence. Our return was deliberate and ceremonial. We repainted every room, rearranged furniture, and replaced the sliding door where the intruders had entered. More symbolically, we drained and refilled the pool, washing away any trace of Karen's presumptuous lounging in our private space. Detective Rodriguez visited periodically with updates on the broader case. Authorities had identified over 40 victims across 5 states, with total financial losses exceeding $300,000. Karen's methodical records became evidence against her, but also facilitated victim identification and restitution. She kept files on everyone: potential targets, people who paid deposits, even neighbors who might notice suspicious activity, Rodriguez explained during her final visit. "Your security footage was the breakthrough that connected everything." Perhaps the most unexpected development came through the victim support group that formed during the legal proceedings. What began as shared courthouse conversations evolved into regular meetings, then friendships, then community action. Together, we developed an awareness program about property fraud, speaking at community centers and real estate offices. Melissa created an online resource with warning signs and protection strategies. 2 victims with legal backgrounds lobbied for legislative changes to make property record verification more robust. "Karen would hate this most of all," Jim remarked during our neighborhood cookout. "Her crimes ended up strengthening the very community she exploited." That community had proven to be our most valuable asset in recovery. Neighbors who once simply waved in passing now checked in regularly. The couple down the street installed a compatible security system linked with ours for mutual monitoring. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly widow across the street, joined a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on property security. Our home transformation culminated with what we called our reclamation party. Unlike Karen's fictional housewarming, this gathering filled our backyard with genuine friends, supportive neighbors, and fellow survivors of her schemes. "A toast," I proposed, raising my glass beside the pool that had once been the centerpiece of Karen's deception, to resilience, to community, and to reclaiming what's ours. The most meaningful moment came toward the evening's end, when Melissa led everyone on a tour of our home, the same spaces Karen had invaded and photographed, now thoroughly reclaimed and renewed. Where violation had occurred, strength had grown. We learned Karen had attempted to maintain her facade even in prison, telling fellow inmates she was a political prisoner, targeted for disrupting the real estate establishment. The ruse collapsed when a guard recognized her from news coverage and shared the real story. Even in confinement, consequences followed her deceptions. The final page in Karen's chapter arrived unexpectedly, a letter from her younger sister, found among the contact information in the court records. "I want to apologize for the pain my sister caused your family, and so many others," she wrote. "Linda's behavior has been a source of shame and grief for our family for many years. Your strength in the face of her actions is truly admirable." The letter revealed a history of similar behaviors stretching back to childhood, escalating through adolescence and finally blooming into the elaborate criminal enterprise that had entangled us. It offered no excuses but provided context that somehow helped dissolve the last of our lingering anger. 1 year to the day after I'd first discovered Karen lounging by our pool, Melissa and I floated on those same waters beneath a perfect summer. Sky, cold drinks in hand, comfortable silence between us. "Do you ever think about her?" Melissa asked, breaking the quiet. "Less and less," I admitted. "She'll be in prison for years, but we're free of her now." That was the true resolution, not just legal justice or financial restoration, but emotional liberation. Karen had invaded our property, disrupted our peace, and attempted to claim what wasn't hers. For a time, she'd succeeded in stealing our sense of security and connection to our home. But in the end, she'd failed at the thing that mattered most. She couldn't take what truly makes a home, the relationships, memories, and sense of belonging that no deed, fraudulent or genuine, could ever truly convey.